Hello, chess friends, and welcome to Zarov's Chess Channel, and welcome to the Lindores Abbey Rapid Challenge in 2020. We're finally in the final stage. It's Dubov against Hikaru Nakamura. When I watched this whole tournament, I think it's fully deserved because Hikaru was first in the group stage. Dubov also played some great chess, so this is for me the fair finals. I think the Hikaru Nakamura showed also great defensive skills against Magnus Carlsen. Not that he was only trying to do his common attacks. He also played very nice defensively, I think, and deserves now to be in the finals. Dubov kicked out Sergei Karyakin, who played also great tournament, and also the Illyrian, so this is now our top final. We are now in game one. Dubov with the white pieces. He has every right here to be confident because he plays really great chess. He plays really simplified chess. It's time now to see how he can play against the legendary Hikaru. This was really an exciting moment for me because I followed now this guy Dubov. He played really great. Hikaru, we all know him, I think, much for longer. So Hikaru is of course a popular guy. This guy Dubov has now the cameras, the focus on him, which is really great for him in the future in his chess career. So let's check out now the first game. We have d4 played by Dubov. We have knight to f6 by Hikaru. c4, e6 after knight to f3. We have the counter Nimzo-Indian setup, so we don't want to play knight to c3, allowing your opponent to play bishop to b4 and pin you. We have d5. Hikaru plays the Queen's Gambit decline now, transposes from Nimzo-Indian sort of setup into a Queen's Gambit decline. After knight to c3, we have the three knights variation of the Queen's Gambit decline, and now bishop to e7. Here Dubov played bishop to g5. The most popular way now these days is to play the move bishop to f4, which is the so-called Harvard's attack. There are more, I think, tactical ideas behind this move bishop to f4. You get use of this diagonal, not on this, but okay. Bishop to g5, very aggressive move also, because with this move bishop to g5 we are attacking of course the knight on f6, which is of course the protector of the d5. So basically this Queen's Gambit declined is based around this d5 square. The battle is really for the center. Here after the move h6, bishop to h4. So that's why in my opinion this bishop to f4 is a more flexible line. You always risk this move h6 after bishop to h4. In some occasions you see also that Black will go into simplification lines with knight to e4, forcing really even a much more simplified position. So in the game castling played by Hikaru, we have queen to c2. White delays a little bit the situation here in the center, and what to do when you see that your opponent's king is in the center, you have to strike in the center. So it's a very good idea here by Hikaru. What you don't want to do from white and black's perspective is to risk an isolated pawn. So whenever you see such a dynamic position in the center, when the pawns, when we have really this pawn collision, then you don't want to risk an isolated pawn. So you have to always watch which pawn should I trade in order to not be left with an isolated pawn. So that's why here d takes c5. So the idea of course by Hikaru Nakamura is, for instance, to play d takes c4, then maybe this d4 would be weak. So that's why d takes c5, and we have d takes c4. So both sides still have a compact position, still they don't have isolated pawns. Of course these are targets, so these pawns can be taken anyway, so it's not good to defend these pawns, so you lose them, so it's not a problem, but at least none of the sides has an isolated pawn. So e3, we have knight to a6. Hikaru of course attacks this pawn with the knight, because he has already played with the bishop. Basically in this opening stage you don't want to play with the same piece twice. Of course you have to play twice to take the pawn, but at least you'll have the knight on a very nice centralized square. Still your bishop here protecting your knight on f6, so knight to a6 also common theory. So bishop to c4, knight takes c5, castling, played by Dubov, and a6. So the idea behind this move a6 is of course to place in some occasions b5, but what white could do is here to play maybe the move a4. It is a common idea, but there is a problem about this move a4, so that's why this a6 is sort of a provocative move a little bit. We are trying to get our opponent to play this move a4, because if you play a4, then black would search maybe some knight jumps here on b4, so black would search maybe some maneuvers in order to get something like knight to b4 and then maybe knight to d5. So black would try to cement the center with his knights, and that's always risky when you play pawn moves. Then you also leave some spaces behind. So that's why Daniil Dubov played first rook to d1, attacking the queen, queen to e8 by Hikaru, and now bishop to e2. So the idea behind this move, bishop to e2, is to create sort of a discovered attack here by the queen on the knight. So for instance, we could go bishop to f6. After bishop takes f6, we could go something like knight to d5, attacking the bishop and also the knight discoverly. Then after e takes d5, black would risk again to have this isolated pawn. Let's see this possible tactic. Maybe let's go search here for a bad move. Maybe bishop to f6. After bishop takes f6, then knight to d5 would be, I think, sort of an idea. Maybe e takes d5 and queen to c5. So of course you could take the pawn, but here this weakness is something that you have to take care of. So that's why in the game, after the move bishop to e2, Hikaru played this very nice move b6. So protecting this knight. In the game, b4 was played, which seems that maybe something went wrong for Hikaru because he gets now his knight kicked away. But it's not a problem. You see, still Hikaru has a great compact position with his knight. Everything is well protected, and we have now a knight to d4. So it seems so that black could take maybe the pawn on b4, but it's not such a good idea because you get something like bishop to f3, then you get something like knight to c6, so you would be forced maybe here to give up your bishop pair. That's the problem. You see the rook is really endangered here with the move bishop to f3. You would have to cover again with some knight to d5 ideas. You could maybe after bishop to f3 play bishop takes c3, knight takes, but now after something like bishop to d5, knight to d5, bishop takes d5, and e takes d5, then queen to c6 is very, very risky here already for black. You have to move the rook somewhere. Still, we would have possibilities to play something like bishop to g3, bishop to d6. So although down a pawn, this is really a bad position for black. That's why after the move knight to d4, first bishop to b7 played by Hikaru. He didn't fall for this. He didn't take the pawn on b4. Very nice move. And queen to b2. Now Daniil Dubov has to protect this pawn. And the good thing about this move, queen to b2, is that you get out of this open file. So when we develop the queen, you want to play the queen somewhere where it's not vulnerable to your opponent's attacks. Maybe here you see the rooks will come, of course, on this open files on the c and d file. So that's why it's also maybe an unnatural square for the queen here, the square e8, but at least the queen is not vulnerable to your opponent's rook attack. So you see, both players got out with the queens out of the range of the potential rook. So here rook to c8, and we have now b5, which I think wasn't the best of moves by Daniil Dubov. It is, of course, forcing black to do something. Of course, Hikaru make this move a5, passing through, so the position on the queen side is fixed. Basically, you cannot do anything, but now I think this knight can come into the game again through the square c5, or we could play bishop to c5. So you see, pawn moves are always dangerous moves in chess. After b5, a5, you see, maybe a better idea instead of this b5 is to play simply bishop to g3, searching for some ideas here to get some kind of an activity, new activity on this diagonal with this dark square bishop. b5, very, very risky. After a5, we have knight to f4. Hikaru, of course, prevents this idea. Daniil Dubov prevents this idea for Hikaru to jump with the knight on c5. And here, Hikaru played on the simplification line, knight to d5. As I said, that's why I like in the beginning more this bishop to f4 idea than this bishop to g5. It is only my style. Maybe I'm wrong, but as I said, here you see, basically now in this position, white is forced to give up his very powerful bishop here after bishop takes e7, queen to e7. The position is so simplified that basically the player that makes really a huge blunder will win this game. This is really an equal position, but still I think black is slightly better here because we have always the possibility to get our knight on c5. Here in the game, bishop to f3 was played, and now comes this very nice move. You see this b5 move. Although it was a breakthrough sort of, but it's also risky here because now this knight is very well placed. We have knight to c5 and here rook to c5. What you don't want to do here is to take with the pawn. It seems like a good move. You get a tempo on the knight, but after knight to e2, we have now the possibility to play something like a4, then we would have this supported pass pawn, and this c5 becomes suddenly really a weakness in your position. So that's why you have to keep it compact here. Rook to c5, not b takes c5. So again, Hikaru doesn't risk some isolated pawn situations. Here knight to c6, and here bishop takes c6. So this was really a mistake now. This was, I think, the first mistake by Daniil Dubov to play this move knight to c6. You don't have to do this. Basically, I think it's the best way here to proceed. Rook to c1 to compete with this rook on the c file. After rook to c1, we could maybe again try to compete with this rook on the c file. So, but this move knight to c6 is very, very risky because you basically lose the pawn. That's the main problem. You lost the pawn without counterplay at all. Big mistake here, I think, by Daniil Dubov. What you don't want to do is to take immediately with the move rook to c6, because probably Daniil Dubov thought that he could go maybe something like queen to e5. This would be very dangerous, but Hikaru, of course, a great tactician, a great defensive player, which he showed really against Magnus Carlsen. He defended very well. That's the most important thing, how to win games against Magnus Carlsen. First, you have to sometimes defend and maybe then find counter attacks. Here, after the move b takes c6, here queen to c7. We can take, then after that, of course, with the queen, we have rook to c1, queen takes c6, and now rook takes c6. Here, after queen takes c6, Daniil Dubov tried here the move bishop to d5, because you have to take with the pawn. But after e takes d5, still Hikaru Nakamura is one pawn up. Although we have now an isolated pawn on d5, but it can be defended. And in the game, rook to c1 was played by Daniil Dubov, and queen to d6. Now, after g3, of course, Hikaru protects this pawn. He wants to move his isolated pawn. So one of the best ways to proceed with an isolated pawn is to try to push it. So if we handle this idea, if we handle this problem of this isolated pawn, then we can go simply into a favorable endgame with a 2 versus 1 situation. So first of all, we don't want to lose this d5, then it's time to push here on the queen side. So queen to b5, again a mistake by Daniil Dubov, because he didn't apply the main idea how to play against isolated pawns. So the better idea is to play queen to d4. You have to block the isolated pawn. You have to create a blockade. So you don't want to this pawn to be advanced. Now I think there are maybe some counterplay possibilities, at least here to get a draw. But queen to b5, another huge mistake by Daniil Dubov. Here Hikaru solves now these problems after e takes d4, queen takes d4, and you see still this b6 is protected. So rook to c6, and Hikaru played a very nice move queen to e4, because if you take with some piece, then you get checkmated on d1. That's the main problem. So that's why rook to c1 was played, and now queen to f3. It seems again now that Daniil Dubov could take a pawn here on b6, but it's not possible, because we have rook to d1 with a check, rook takes, queen takes, and after king to g2, we would have simply queen to e4, queen to d5, attacking the king, and after king to g1, we would take another pawn. This pass pawn is really a problematic thing for Daniil Dubov. I think it's game over in this position. So that's why after the move queen to f3, Daniil realized his problems, played queen to b1, retreating with this queen, and now g6. So Hikaru plays a very nice defensive move. I just want you to memorize this setup of pawns when you play against the queen, because this is a very important setup that your opponent cannot do perpetual. So you could always hide me here h7, then maybe g7. So it's very important to create this pawn structure. Try it out sometimes. This is very important in order to not get perpetuals, because if you want to win this game, the perpetual check is drawish idea here by white. So that's why this setup, really, I want to memorize it, check it out, try it out, see it, why white cannot do perpetuals on you. So it's very important to know that idea in queen ending. So here h4 played by Daniil Dubov. We have rook to d6. So Hikaru plays natural moves, protect his pawn, and we have queen to a1. The idea is, of course, to play something like rook to c8, a check, and then checkmate here on h8. But now king to h7, because now this rook lift doesn't come with a check, and you risk some rook to d1 ideas. So that's why queen to b1 again, and h5. Here Hikaru blocks the position on the king side, and we have rook to e1, a4. So it's very easy now for Hikaru to find the best next move. Again, if you try some queen lifts, then again this threat would be present with queen rook to d1. So queen to b4, again you see rook to d1 immediately played here by Hikaru Nakamura. And the problem also for Daniil Dubov was that he was low on time here. You saw the problems if you take, then queen takes, and we would play again queen to d5, taking this a2. So here this happened really. Here king to h2 was played, but another problem, we have now a new position in which Hikaru again can try to take this f2 pawn or this a2. So queen to b6, and now finally queen takes a2. We have now pass pawn. This is basically a losing endgame here for white. Queen to f6, queen to e6. If you trade off the queens, then nothing can stop this pass pawn. So queen to c3, and now queen to b3 again. Queen to f6 was played, and now a3. So you see this setup that I've mentioned you. Of course, the pawn was on h6, but it's now on h5. It's similar, so it's basically the same motif here. It allows now Hikaru Nakamura to protect this pawn on f7, but also to push his pawn on a2 and a1. So after g4, here Daniil Dubov is trying maybe to split some pawns, to do some perpetuals with the queen, but not the problem. Again, Hikaru tries this idea, queen to e6, we have queen to f3, and now a2 in this position. Daniil Dubov resigned. There's nothing you can do. If you try to cover it, then we could go maybe something like queen to f6 and then simply promotion. So, okay, this wasn't maybe the best of games for a final. It's understandable, but I think in this game Daniil Dubov was a little bit overconfident. Played on this knight to c6 idea, which was a mistake. Lost a pawn, lost a pawn endgame. I don't think that Hikaru maybe played here a great game. He played great defensively. Counterattacked, simply took a pawn and won the game deserved. I think he played a good game here. We'll see what will happen in the continuation of the tournament. Meanwhile, you can watch my other commented chess games so far, and you can also watch my best chess games of all time if you want to see the best chess games that have been ever played in chess history. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.